four main conditions, and sometimes it is very difficult to obey such four main conditions in most of the industries. So mostly these are the various reasons that if any barriers has been put on to the firms, then of course that is not the perfectly competitive market. And in fact, if the buyers don't know about the particular prices of the same products, or they buy at a different supplier at a different prices, that is also not the condition of the perfectly competitive market. Sometimes the products would be heterogeneous rather than homogeneous. Sometimes the products could not be identical in the market. So that means that is not a condition of the perfectly competitive market. And the people, sometimes the people can only buy from one supplier rather than preferring to buy from different businesses or the firms. So that is also not a condition of the perfectly competitive market or perfect competition. So sometimes it is very difficult in most of the industries where such four main conditions can be obeyed by a different, you can see for businesses or the firms. So the answer is no. Sometimes there are, you can say, not exactly the market for a perfectly competitive businesses, as it is very difficult and challenging to, you can say, follow up or fulfill the exact four main conditions of such market. Now we talk about the barriers to entry. So when some government or businesses always have some types of barriers, and the two main barriers is always exist. That is the startup costs and technology. So there are various factors sometimes which is very difficult for the new firms to enter into a perfectly competitive market. So these are the two main factors. The first one is startup cost, the expenses which are incurred to open up a new business, or some firms would pay before the exact amount, or sometimes after the you can see the balance amount. So it is very important that when a particular product reaches to the customer or launch into the market, every time the startup cost is needed, the expenditure would always be occur for a new business to pay up before a particular product would launch into the market. So what would be the startup cost for that particular product? It would be the brand, it would be the machines, it would be the laborers, it would be the product, it would be replace the existing product or implement a new product. So that is every particular accessories need expenses, and that is exactly called the startup cost. The next one is technology. Sometimes the markets requires a high degree of technological know-how. Sometimes the entrepreneurs cannot easily adapt to new technologies for, you can say, in such particular market to enter. So that is also one of the difficult or challenging area when we talk about the technology. That some markets requires a high profile technology knowledge, but as a result, sometimes the entrepreneurs or the businesses or the firms cannot easily enter these markets just because of the expertise knowledge of the technological use. So that is also the one of the barrier to enter into the perfectly competitive market. You can look up the examples which has been given on this particular slide. That is the software pharmacy companies where the technology is very high profile and very expertise. You can see the persons who are in these specialized areas are always aware and have a full knowledge about the technology of how to use. If the businesses can't be able to have a perfect knowledge, then this is also the one of the barrier to entry into the perfectly competitive market. So let's talk about how the demand curve, or you could say how the price would be determined in a perfectly competitive market. So there is an industry curve and there is a firm curve. So based on the industry, the firm actually set up or follow the price. So when we talk about in a perfectly competitive market, firm is a price taker and industry is a price maker. So industry has a full authority to decide the price of a particular product, and firm has to accept that price to offer the same price to the customers. So this is how that in a perfectly competitive market, how the market price is to be determined under the perfect competition. So this is all about D is the demand curve of the firm and the industry, and S is a supply curve. Where the demand and supply intersect to each other, that point is called the equilibrium point, where the equilibrium price will be OP and the equilibrium quantity will be OQ. So when these two curves intersect to each other, that becomes the equilibrium point where the equilibrium price and quantity is OP and OQ. And based on the interaction point between of the demand curves and the supply curve, that point is exactly called the market price, where the average revenue, demand, and the marginal revenue is always being equal. So whatever the industry decide the price, that is OP, the same price has to follow by the firms, and that will be shown in this particular diagram. If you look up the price, that is the same line has been drawn by into the firm's side, where the equilibrium price will be followed or accepted by the firms to offer the same to its customer, where the price is equal to demand is equal to average revenue is equal to marginal revenue. So whatever the you can see the horizontal curve, that curve is called the demand curve, which is equal to price, which is equal to average revenue, it is equal to marginal revenue. Average revenue, the revenue earned based on the per unit basis. But the marginal revenue is it's selling up on the additional units to the different buyers, and that's called the marginal revenue. So this is all about how you determine the market price. The industry has to decide one price, and the firm follow up the same price to offer into the market for the same products, and that is exactly called the determination of the market price under perfect competition. So this is an explanation which I've already explained with the help of the diagram. In the above figure, the price has been shown on the y-axis and the quantity has been shown on the x-axis. When we talk about the left side, that is the industry situation has been described, and the right side, the firm situation has been described. The market demand curve is DD and the market supply curve is SS. When we talk about the interaction of these two curves, that point is called the equilibrium point, and whatever the price has been decided by interaction of these two curves, that price is called the equilibrium price, that is OP, and the equilibrium quantity, that is OQ. And even the same price that all the firms have to accept and to follow and to offer to different buyers in such perfectly competitive market. When we talk, as already explained in the diagram, that firms are the price takers and the industries are the price makers. So when there is a curve, when you look up the curve of the industry, where the industry is a price maker, they have to set up the price into the market, and all the firms has to follow that particular price. And where there is an average revenue is actually called the demand curve. I already told the price which has been set by the industries, that particular line, that horizontal line is called the demand curve, which is equal to the average revenue and the marginal revenue. So in that particular case, if a particular firm selling up an additional units in it at that particular market price, which has been decided by the industry, that is exactly called the average revenue. Now we talk about the short-run equilibrium of a competitive market. So when we talk about in the short-run period, there are exactly the three main assumptions. The first one is the price of the product is already decided by the industry and that is already given. And the firm has to sell any quantity or any units at that price only rather than differentiate the prices and sold to the different you can say the customers. So it's not on buyers. So it's not exactly the assumption. The assumption says that the price of the product is already given and the firm has to follow that price to sell their quantities of the product. Second assumption is whatever the size of the plant of the firm is always constant. There should be no changes in the size of the plant. The third is the firm has to face the given short curve cost curves. That should be equal to the marginal revenue. Marginal cost cuts the marginal revenue curve from below the line. So if you look up the particular diagram, see the marginal cost curve, it cuts below the marginal revenue line, and that is the one of the sufficient and necessary condition to reach the equilibrium point. So these are the two main conditions where the marginal cost must interact the marginal revenue from below, and after the interaction of these two curves, that means it means the firm is always keen to add up any additional units to its outputs as long as the marginal revenue is more than the marginal cost. Firm keep increasing an additional units in its output if the marginal revenue is more than the marginal cost. If the marginal cost is more than the marginal revenue, that means it's not a condition or to reach out to the equilibrium point for a particular firm. So this is a diagram which has been followed that how to achieve the equilibrium point of a firm using the marginal cost and marginal revenue curves. If you look up the necessary condition where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost or the marginal cost cuts below the line of the, you can say the marginal revenue, these two conditions has already fulfilled in this particular diagram. First is the two main curves should intersect to each other, that has been shown in this particular diagram. And in fact, the marginal cost curve cuts below the marginal revenue line. That also the condition, sufficient condition is fulfilled in this particular diagram. And ultimately, when these two curves intersect, that means that exact point is exactly called the equilibrium point. So this is the diagram which has been followed up to reach out the equilibrium point in each of the firm. So when we look up the diagram, we can check on the horizontal line which is called the demand curve of a firm, which is also equals to the price is equal, demand is equal to price is equal to average revenue and marginal revenue. So once you get to know or draw on the horizontal line, that is the demand curve of a firm, then the next step that you have to draw up the marginal revenue curve. So the marginal revenue curve is basically the U-shaped. The marginal cost curve is exactly the U-shaped curve where where the frequently decreasing level intersect the demand curve of a firm and initially reaches to you can say the saturation line above the marginal revenue curve and frequently increases by interacting the marginal revenue curve that is called the marginal cost. So there is a three stages where the at the beginning or initially the curve start declining very frequently and reaches to that saturation point above the marginal or the demand curve and frequently increases to its by interacting the marginal revenue curve and it keeps on the growth stage. That is exactly called the marginal cost curve. When we talk about the quantities, that means when you can say when the marginal cost curve intersect the average revenue curve or the marginal revenue curve, which is always being equal, that means that point where the marginal cost curve and the quantity has reached up above the saturation point of the marginal cost, that is A B. So the original, we can see the quantity, it's OB, and the original price which has been set up, or you can see the original revenue and cost, that is called the CA. When we talk about the marginal cost, which is initially declining, that means the ultimately the output has already, you can say, the decrease due to the cost or the revenues remains constant. That is the CA dash and the OB dash. And the point where the equilibrium point will reach out, it's that point where the marginal cost is increasing and cut below the marginal revenue or average revenue curves. That point is exactly called the equilibrium point, but because the equilibrium point could be achieved when the cost, when the marginal cost cuts the marginal revenue curve at its you can see the maximum level, the increasing level, and that curve, which this particular statement is already proved in this particular diagram. So this is how the equilibrium of the firm could be achieved using the marginal cost and the marginal revenue curves. So this is an explanation of this particular diagram where it is as it is a perfectly competitive market where the demand is perfectly elastic, or as I already told in the diagram during the explanation of such, that the demand curve, it is in a horizontal line, and when we talk about it in a macroeconomics basis, in the firm is called the perfectly elastic demand curve. So it always in such particular demand, in such particular price or the perfectly elastic demand curve, the firm can produce any output or any units of quantity at a particular market price. And as a result, the demand curve is always parallel to the x-axis. That means the it's anyway the quantity could increases as the marginal cost is increases at its optimum level. And you can see here that marginal curve is coincided with the average revenue. That means the whatever the demand curve line, which is a perfectly elastic demand curve, where the average revenue is always being equal to the marginal revenue. So when we talk about the supply curves or the supply, we always talk about the cost curves. When we talk about the supply side, we always talk about the cost curves, because when we supply or to any of the products, the various you can see the vendors or the various you can see the channels of distribution, cost will always involve. And what would be that cost are? That is called the average fixed cost, average variable cost, marginal cost, and average total cost. When we talk about AFC, that is average fixed cost, it refers to the fixed cost per unit of output. When we talk about the average variable cost, it refers to a variable cost of basis on the per unit of output. When we talk about the marginal cost, it's such cost which incurred by adding up an additional units to its output. That's called the marginal cost. Average total cost, it refers to a total cost per unit of output. That means mathematically, I could say the total cost by number of units. When we talk about AFC, it refers mathematically average cost, fixed cost by number of output, that becomes average variable cost. Average fixed cost. When we talk about the average variable cost, it refers to a variable cost by number of units. It becomes the average variable cost. And following up these costs, the supply curve is one of the main part of the marginal cost curve, which always lies above the average variable cost. And as I told, the marginal cost is always sloping upwards when it after reaching up the saturation point. If you look at the shape of the marginal cost, the key point is the saturation point, and it's immediately after the saturation, instead of declining, it always slopes it frequently upwards. So that is called the marginal cost curve, which always lies and cuts the marginal revenue and the average revenue curve. So when we talk about the marginal cost curves, it always lies above the average variable cost. So this is the exactly the supply side that I have explained in that particular diagram. But when we talk about the short run, theoretically, the firm cannot avoid the fixed cost. Every prices will be decided based on the fixed cost, whether it would be the total fixed cost or the average fixed cost. In case if the production is zero, the firm of course incurred these costs. The firm cannot avoid these costs if the production is exactly zero. And in fact, in this particular situation, the firm cannot even avoid the losses instead of producing nothing. And of course, the firm can continue the production as long as the exact losses will not exceed its total fixed cost. Or in other words, when we talk about the firm, it produces as long as its average price, which always equal or more than the average variable cost. So this is the exact theoretical condition when there is zero production, how the firm could deal such a situation in terms of incurring the cost. So whether it would be the fixed cost, it keeps producing as long as until the average price is equal or more than the average cost, or the losses should not exceed or should not more than the fixed cost. So if these two conditions is fulfilled, then definitely the firm will produce as more as until the losses should be equal to its fixed cost. So this is the actually the explanation in reference to the cost curves, which is always related to the marginal cost, because marginal cost is one of the most important or integral part of determining the equilibrium point of the firm. Now there are three possibilities in the short run. The first one is normal profit, second one is normal losses, and the third one is super normal profits. So this is a situation of the normal profit where the marginal cost and the average cost has been drawn. So, and of course, the demand curve is always be the same. That is the perfectly elastic. In all of the three possibilities, in all of the three situations where the demand curve is perfectly elastic, you can see the horizontal, which always equal to the price, is equal to marginal revenue and average revenue. So there are two curves which determine exactly the normal profits, that is the marginal cost and the average cost. So before I come up to begin at how the normal profits has been attained in this particular situation. So average cost refers to the total cost per unit of output. So that is called the average cost. But the marginal cost is a cost incurred by adding up an additional unit to its output. That's called the marginal cost. So there are two curves that you have to draw in each of the situation, in each of the possibility in the short-term period, where the firm will get to know what will be the point of the normal profits to be attained and the losses is to be attained and the super normal profits is to be attained. So this is a possibility, this is a situation, a case of the normal profits where the average cost has been drawn in a, you can see, a flatter U-shaped, and the marginal cost cuts the minimum point at the average cost curve, that is called the interaction of these two curves, the point called A. A refers to an equilibrium point where the equilibrium quantity is OQ and the equilibrium price is OP, which is equal to the demand curve of the firm. When the demand curve of the firm and these two curves intersect, the demand curve and you can see the marginal cost cuts the demand curve along with the average cost curve. That point, that A point, exactly called as equilibrium point, and that is a situation occurs the normal profit. That is the at a equilibrium prices OP and OQ. So that exactly that point is called the normal profit point or equilibrium point, where at the same equilibrium point the firm offers the identical products to different buyers. So the more and more sales occur, the revenue and the profits will gain more in case of the firm, you can say, side. So it totally depends on the equilibrium price, totally depends on the marginal cost, as the particular additional units has to be added on to its output and the more and more revenues is to be earned. So as the demand grows more and more, ultimately the supply will also goes up and it leads to a more revenue, more profits at point A. So that is the scenario of the normal profit. So this is a diagram and this is a small explanation of this diagram which I've already explained in this particular looking of the diagram. So in the above figure, you can see the cost and revenues on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. If you look up on the x-axis, the quantity has been shown and the price, cost and revenues has been shown. So as the marginal cost is automatically cuts the marginal revenue curve at from below point A. So look up the point A, the both curves that intersect, but that would be the below of the average revenue curves. And at point A, P is the equilibrium point price and the Q is the equilibrium quantity. So we talk about the correspond to the equilibrium quantity. It always shows here when the average revenue is equal to the marginal revenue. So the normal profit situation or the equation of the normal profit is the average revenue is equal to average cost, which is actually the condition of the normal profit. When these two curves are equal, that means it is a situation of the normal profit in case of short period. So the particular equation has been mentioned where the average cost is equal to the average revenue. That means in this particular, you can see the condition, the firm is earning only a normal profit. Now, this is a case of the loss where the loss situation in perfect competitive market. So, this is a scenario where the exact the demand curve is always be perfectly elastic, which is equal to the you can say marginal revenue, marginal cost, and average revenue. So as you can see, why the marginal cost has been added in this particular condition. As you can see, there are sufficient two conditions would be there where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and the marginal cost cuts below the marginal revenue. So these two conditions must be fulfilled dynamically, graphically in the perfectly competitive market. So if you look up the diagram where the demand curve which is equal to price, average revenue, marginal cost, and average marginal revenue, they're all equal to each other, and it is a horizontal line, right? So just above the horizontal line, you can say you have to draw the average total cost. I'm not talking about the average cost. Of course, the average cost is always equals to the average total cost, which is always remains the same. So you have to draw just above the average total cost or average cost. So from the when you have drawn the average total cost, which is more flatter at the minimum point of the average curve, or you can say cost curve, or the saturation point of the average cost curve, you have to draw the marginal cost curve which intersect the average or the saturation point of the average total cost curve or the average cost curves. So once you draw or intersect that marginal cost curve will intersect the demand curve line, that point, that interaction point of marginal cost curve and the demand curve, that point is called the A point, which is called the equilibrium point where the marginal cost intersect the marginal revenue demand curve or the price line of you can see at that particular point. So once the marginal cost curve intersect the price line curve or demand curve, and automatically when it goes upwards very frequently and intersect the average cost curve line at its minimum point, so that exactly a point when you draw the exact line, that is a quantity line OQ dash, that line is stands a point B, and the equilibrium price, that is P dash, and the equilibrium price when there is a losses and the quantity remains the same and the prices will go up, then ultimately it turns into a losses, which refers to a OP dash dash. So that is the what would be the area of the losses, that is the P dash A B P dash dash. So this particular area which has been drawn, that area is called the normal losses. So it is very easy to draw that you just have to keep in mind that the demand curve would remains the horizontal perfectly elastic, and above you have to draw the average total cost line. And once you have drawn, just draw the marginal cost line initially declining, reach to saturation frequently sloping upwards and cuts the demand curve or the price line or the average revenue or marginal revenue. When it cuts that big, that's a equilibrium point called A. Just drawn an upward a continuous line and reaches to a price line. That box is exactly called the normal losses. So this is the exact scenario, you can say, of the normal loss in a perfectly competitive market. This is an explanation has been given based on the diagram, which always shows a normal loss situation. So it's very simple that how you explain this diagram. You have to express what is given on the x-axis, what is given on the y-axis, then marginal cost cuts the marginal revenue at below point A, which I have already shown. That is an equilibrium point, which I already shown A is an equilibrium point. Then accordingly at point A, the what would be the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price, that is P dash and the Q dash are the equilibrium price and quantity. And when we talk about the at the equilibrium quantity, is always shows that the average cost is more than the average revenue. Why? Because if you look at the diagram, the average cost curve is more flatter. That means that average cost curve is more than the average revenue curve based on the particular losses scenario. Then in this particular case, automatically the average cost is more than the average revenue. It means now there is a shifting of the prices, that is OP to OP dash, and ultimately it turns into a losses, and the particular area of the loss is based on the same quantity and the price increment, that is called the P star P dash VA, which I already showed. P star A, B, A or B, that is called the P dash. So this is the exact area of the losses. Now we talk about the third possibility, that is the super normal profit situation. This is the where in the losses you have to draw the average cost above the demand curve. But in this particular situation, you have to draw below you have to draw the average cost curve below the demand or price line. So and this situation then it turns to a normal or super normal profits. So that is in the normal profit that you have to draw the average cost curve which touches the demand. But in the supernormal profits, you have to draw the average cost curve below the demand curve. It's shown in the diagram as well. That you have to draw first the demand curve of the firm, which is also equal to the price, average revenue, and the marginal revenue. So once you draw this particular line, you have to draw the next step is to draw the average cost curve, which is a more flatter. So you can draw the same shape of the average curve, which is basically a more flatter U-shaped curve. So once you draw the average cost curve, if once you draw, there is a point, you can say a point which cuts the above the average cost saturation point, and that a point is called the new equilibrium point. So the original equilibrium point is where the marginal cost curve intersect the demand curve and the marginal revenue. That point, B point, is the original equilibrium point, and where the exact the quantity equilibrium quantity cuts that particular point, that A point is called a new equilibrium point, which cuts, you can say, above the marginal cost curve. So once you have drawn the AB point, you can easily draw the price, as already the original price P star or P star is already the original price of the demand curve. Once the prices would get declined and quantity would remain the same, that rectangular gap, that rectangular you can see the distance is exactly called the supernormal profits, where the average cost curve drawn below the demand or price line, and Of course, the marginal cost curve cuts the minimum point of the average cost and automatically turn to cuts the demand curve or the price line. That point B is refers to an original equilibrium point, and once the original quantity line has been drawn, there is another point has been come up, that is point A, which is a new equilibrium point where the actually it declines the price line from OP star to OP dash, and the equilibrium quantity would remains the same, that is OQ dash. So whatever the distance a rectangular gap would be, that is P star P A P dash or P star P dash A B. This particular rectangular, it refers the gap, the distance of this rectangular refers to a normal profits, super normal profits, where the average cost cuts you can say below the demand curve and the marginal cost cuts below the average cost and immediately sloping upwards and cuts the demand curve. So this is the situation, this is a particular gap which refers to a normal, super normal profits. So this is a small explanation which has been given and which is very similar to the normal profits here. So in the above figure, the revenue or the average revenue is already shown, that is OP star, which is the original one, and the cost is and the units, it's always been an OP dash. So the per unit, of course, whatever the revenue is almost high in this particular situation comparatively to the per unit average per unit cost. So the average revenue curve is, or the marginal revenue curve is lies above the average cost curve, that is the original quantity, that is Q star, and in this particular situation, the firm earning the supernormal profits, which has been shown in the particular gap area. The total profit area is P dash P star BE. So this is the exact area where the firms could earn the supernormal profit in this particular situation. Now we talk about the next type, that is monopoly. So monopoly here is that type of market structure, or one of the model of the competition where a particular whole market is dominated, or you can say run by a single seller, where the particular they form such a market where the barriers almost always there in such particular market, and the new competitors cannot enter into such market. Why? Because it incurs a high cost when a particular seller of supply a product to a different buyers. And one of the main advantage of such market is they have a single monopoly power and charges a very you can say high cost and high prices to the exactly buyers. So when we talk about the one of the most developed country, that is the United States of America, such particular structure, this type of market is totally illegal. As in US, there is no monopoly situation. You always monopolistic and a perfectly competitive market in that particular country. And that's the main reason that most of the monopolies who are handling such market, be as a single seller in that particular localized area or a region, it is totally found illegal, and ultimately a strict action, a legal strict action will be taken against such monopolies. So this is the exact overview of the monopoly. These are the examples of the monopolies that during the late 1800s and early 1900s, there is a you can say only the single monopolies could exist. That is the Standard Oil and the Target Steel. So in the late 1800 to the 1990s, 80s, so there is another, the telephonic phone services are also exist and available, that is called the Bell telephone in the United States. And then again, when we talk about the technologies uses the particular desktops or the personal computers, the Microsoft has been accused and converted in code for having a monopolistic characteristics. So that time, if anyone, even in present, if anyone having a monopolistic market or the monopoly, a single monopoly power, and they have a full authority, that means they will convict to a court for having such monopolistic monopoly characteristics in the market. So this is one of the examples when there is a single monopoly, a single product in the whole market. So definitely it is found illegal and you will be accused in the court why you having a single monopoly power in the whole market. Whether it's related to the telephone or telecommunication services, whether it's related to the oil, whether it's related to the steel, whether it's related to any technological softwares. So this is the exact examples of the single monopolies. Natural monopolies. What is the natural monopolies? Some monopolies are always get granted a permission by the government that you need to exit. So such natural monopolies are those markets which run at their best level, and only the one firm, if that one firm supplies all the goods to the ultimate consumers. So that's for the natural monopolies, where the some monopolies are allowed actually by the government to exit. That you need to, now there is a time to exit from the market, and you have did your best services, and we have provided all those services or products to the consumers in that particular market. So that is the one of the example where the government, they took the permission from the government, and by the order of the government to exit this exit, you can see the company has immediately exit by the in the market by the approval or permission of the government. That is Monroe County Water Authority in the United States, where this particular company has, it's a natural monopoly market, where this company it's actually granted a permission from the US government, and from the US government has given a lot, right, for a couple of to just provide your best services, and there will be any time when you need to exit such market. So that is the Monroe County Water Authority, where this is called a natural monopoly. But now there is a competition has always occurred in the market due to the sharing of the power lines to the private sectors, and the private sector such you can see monopolies never exist in the market. That is called the natural monopolies. The next one is the government monopolies, where the patents and industrial monopolies actually exist, where you need a license to sell your product for a specified period of time. So these two monopolies is always worked upon. And still in India, it is always exist here. And one of the major industrial monopolies in the US, that is the US major league baseball enterprises. So this is all about for today. So I come up with the more interesting and important topics related to this particular course code in block 1. Till time, have a good time, and thank you for listening, and namaste to all.